I wanted to start by reading you a few examples of relationship advice, which I came across when I was researching my book. So looking at self-help books and problem pages, men's and women's magazines and the like. Never waste an opportunity to say, I love you. Don't be the first to use the L word. Take her at face value. Figure out the hidden meaning why she's upset. Don't use complete sentences during sex. Talk dirty, he'll love it. And work at your relationship. Be spontaneous. Confusing, right? I'm arguing that we're in a state in our culture of relationship uncertainty. So if we think about it, many places at the moment are opening up to same-sex marriage. But at the same time, governments are insisting that lifelong monogamous coupledom is really the only good basis for a family. We've never had greater gender equality than we have now, but there's still a pullback to the idea that men and women are from different planets. And some commentators are saying people should maybe loosen their ideas around infidelity and affairs. Maybe they can be good for relationships. At the same time that other commentators are arguing that online porn is definitely a bad thing for relationships. So we get very mixed messages. So why are we in a state of relationship uncertainty? What sociologists and historians have suggested is that we've got a decline in religion, we've had for many years. We've got unstable jobs. We tend to move around a lot more. We don't stay in communities. And what this means is we start to look to romantic love to be all these things to us, all the things we might have got maybe from religion, from the workplace, from our communities. And love indeed may have become a new religion. But at the same time as this, we're encouraged by media, by advertisers, by each other, to strive for independent individual success and freedom and personal fulfillment, to be true to ourselves, to reach all our goals in life. And this creates a tension. So we're looking to love for belonging, togetherness, for connection with a partner. But at the same time, we're striving for individual freedom and independence and personal fulfillment. There's a tension, which I imagine all of us are sort of familiar with from our own relationships. For the rest of the talk, I'm going to argue that there's two main responses that people have had to that tension. One is to look to the old rules of relationships, the ones that are already out there, for something to cling on to in this state of insecurity. The other is to create new rules, but the danger with those is we tend to cling on to them just as tightly. And I'm going to propose a third way, which is the idea of embracing uncertainty. Okay. So let's start with the old rules. There's my rule book. If we look to mainstream relationship advice, women's and men's magazines, self-help books and the like, the message is that we can get the one true love who will complete us and give us a happily ever after if we follow a particular set of rules. The rules are often gender-related. So in the 1990s, we saw the book The Rules, which people may be familiar with, where women were told that they could find the perfect man who would fall in love with them, stay with them happily forever, if they returned to a kind of traditional femininity. Let him take the initiative. Don't talk too much. Don't laugh too much. Don't demand too much. And then you'll get your happily ever after. Almost a direct response to that, it seemed to me, was the seduction communities of the 2000s, which suggested to men online that they could become alpha males and play the game with women, and that would make them irresistible to women. So all these ideas about rules that you could follow in order to get what you want. And once people are in a relationship, there's a battalion of relationship therapists and agony aunts and experts on hand to ensure that we stay together forever in this state of perfect love and great sex. And if you don't, you're a failure in some way. A lot of pressure. As a relationship therapist, I see the pressure that this puts relationships under. So what are the problems with the old rules? Well, first of all, they're not the old rules. They're according to historians, most of these ideas came about in about the 1950s. We didn't live like this before that. The idea that you should have a romantic partner who is your soulmate, you're in love with them constantly, they're also your best friend, they're also a co-parent potentially, they're also a great sex partner, all of those things wrapped up in one. That's pretty recent because, before we were getting those things from other places perhaps. And Stephanie Kuntz, the historian, says something like, we've always loved a love story, but for most of our past, we didn't try and live in one. We do now. It puts immense pressure on relationships. We're living increasingly long lives. If we get together quite young, that's somebody we're going to be with for an awful long time that we want to give us constant love, great sex, validation, security. And TED talker Esther Perel, who's a colleague of mine, says that often the old rules are quite contradictory. We're looking to the same person for safety and freedom, for everyday togetherness and passion. And she argues, it's very difficult to get those things in the same place. And what this leads to is things like bouncing from person to person, looking for the one in a kind of serial monogamy, or affairs, which about 50 to 60% of married people have. Staying bitterly in a relationship because you've kind of given up on them meeting your expectations, or even staying in quite damaging relationships. And some people just giving up on it all because they've been too bruised and battered by breakup after breakup. So much for the old rules. The new rules. You may wonder what this image is about. This is an idea I got from the author, the magnificent author, Terry Pratchett, who in one of his books talks about the crab bucket. And in a crab bucket, if one crab tries to escape, as one of these is, the other crabs will pull it back into the bucket. And whilst the old rules of relationships may not be working very well, when people do propose alternatives, they are often pulled back into the mainstream crab bucket, or the crab bucket of the old rules. Think about how anyone doing sex, gender, or relationships differently is treated in the media. Either maybe as a weirdo, an object of ridicule, maybe that's the best case scenario, or even as a dangerous threat to society. Consider kinky people, trans people, people in open relationships. How are they treated in movies or in the news when you do see those things reported? Going beyond Terry Pratchett's original idea, I wondered to myself, well, what happens if a crab does escape the bucket? Well, they end up scuttling around on the beach. And that's quite a dangerous and precarious place to be, especially the size of the seagulls around here. I wouldn't want to be that crab. So what happens is that they tend to find another bucket and get into that where it's nice and safe. We like being in the crab bucket. So if we've gone out of one, we may easily go and find another one. And there are gay crab buckets, there are kinky crab buckets, there are polyamorous crab buckets. This is what we tend to do. So what this means is when we create a new way of doing relationships, when we get out of the one bucket, we then get back into another and often grasp hold of that just as tightly. So for example, in my research about open non-monogamous relationships, some groups say it's only okay to have sex with other people. You mustn't have a love relationship with another person. That's the kind of rule. Or maybe you need lots of rules and contracts to protect your primary relationship. Or maybe everybody must be free to do whatever they want and jealousy and security just not allowed. Those are examples of kind of grasping a new rule just as tightly as maybe other people are grasping an old rule. And in the new crab bucket, again, if any crab does try to escape, they're pulled back into the bucket. So for my last slide, this TED Talk, the theme is passing it on. And what I'm suggesting here is that as a culture, we tend to pass on old rules of relationships, which are sometimes not helpful, sometimes even damaging. But there's a danger that if we develop different rules to pass on, they become just as inflexible and brittle. An alternative, which I would like to pass on, is the idea of embracing uncertainty. And the metaphor depicted in this slide, imperfectly, is one from the writer Martine Batchelor, who says, imagine, if you will, that you're holding in your hand a precious object. I'm holding a fish in this slide, because that's about as close to a precious object as I could find in my house, but it's a golden fish, it's beautiful. You've got it in your hand. What do we tend to do if we've got a precious object in our hands? We tend to grab it tight to keep it safe. No one else can get it. But also we can't see it. And our hand might get cramp after a while. Well, it certainly will if we hold it very tightly. If that happens, the temptation then is to hurl it away from us, to get rid of it. But then we don't have it at all. And Martine's alternative is to hold the precious object gently in our hand so we can see it, so we can put it down, pick it up again. It's a great metaphor for so much in life, but particularly for the rules of relationships and for relationships themselves. So whether we were turning to the old rules or the new rules, if we take this metaphor, we would hold them gently. We would see what they had to offer us, but also how they might limit us. And we could be flexible about the fact that they made it change over time. if we think about the implications for relationships themselves, instead of grasping hold of one person or of romantic relationships and insisting that this meets all of our needs, we could hold all of our relationships more gently and appreciate what we get from partners, from friends, family, colleagues, everybody, from the long-term connections we have to the fleeting connections we might have today when we meet somebody over coffee. And this really relates back to some of the other talks we've heard today about interconnectedness, or about appreciating the person who produced that cup of coffee in front of us. We appreciate all the relationships, however far away. Also, if we hold relationships gently, we can see more clearly when we need to change them, rather than feeling that either we have to stay together exactly as they are, or break up and never see each other again. And there's a real need at this time to find something between those two places, I think. And we can see that people maybe are not objects to figure out and play in order to get what we want from them, in the way that the rules girls and the games boys were doing. But rather, everyone's a complex person in their own right. This relates to the amazing TED talker Brené Brown talks all about vulnerability. It's about appreciating other people's vulnerability and our own vulnerability and being able to see that, rather than trying to avoid it. And in that way, as Layla was saying, we can meet people in the present. We can be present to all the people in our lives, rather than fixing them as what they were in the past or what we wish they could be in the future. And those are the kind of ideas about relationships that I'd like to pass on. Thank you.